I wasn't looking for evidence of inhabited mountain interiors when I came across the geological survey data. LIDAR penetration scans from 2008. Standard documentation of mineral deposit assessment. The usual record of resource exploration. Technicians positioned at survey stations across the Altai Mountains. Geologists examining subsurface density readings. The kind of data sets that fill national mining archives across Central Asia without attracting particular attention. But one scan, preserved in a university geology collection in Almaty, contained something I couldn't immediately place, a void space pattern in the background data that seemed innocuous until I began comparing it to other survey results, then another, then dozens more from the same period. At first glance, nothing seems out of place. Geological survey teams documented at work across Central Asia, the Altai Range, the Tian Shan, the Pamir Mountains, the standard historical record of 21st century resource assessment, until you linger on certain details visible in the density readings themselves. Details that repeat with disturbing consistency across completely separate surveys, separated by thousands of kilometers with supposedly no coordination between geological firms. The void spaces were identical. Not similar, identical, and this is the most peculiar part. These weren't the natural cave formations or mineral deposits you would expect from mountain geology surveys. These were something else entirely. Chambers that appear in the subsurface density data, visible beyond the expected geological strata. Spaces that show architectural characteristics inconsistent with natural cave formation processes. The further I went into geological archives, the more these interior voids emerged. Not occasionally, not coincidentally, but systematically in LIDAR scans from mountains surveyed during the exact same 6-year window. A scan that wasn't meant to stand out shows what appears to be routine subsurface density mapping beneath a mountain peak in the Altai Range. The data is dated March 2008. The location identified only as Survey Site 47 in the archive notes. Standard penetration readings visible in the foreground. Normal geological composition. Nothing unusual about the documented survey activity itself. What's notable, however, is visible in the deeper sections of the scan. A void space in the mountain's interior. Not a cavity created by water erosion, not a natural cave system, but a chamber showing geometric precision in its dimensions. The void itself displays characteristics inconsistent with geological formation processes. Walls too smooth for natural development. Angular corners that suggest architectural planning. Load-bearing configurations that indicate knowledge of structural engineering principles not associated with natural cave systems. This prompts a straightforward yet vital question. How did chambers built with architectural precision end up inside mountains selected for geological surveys in 2008? The sanctioned explanation falls apart at this point. We're told these were discovered accidentally during routine surveying, that geological teams occasionally encountered unusual void spaces, remnants of ancient mining operations, or natural cave systems enlarged by unknown processes. Random survival from earlier periods of human activity. That any similarities across different mountains are coincidental. The natural result of Central Asian geology producing comparable formations across vast distances. But the scans suggest otherwise. A surviving dataset from Kazakhstan shows subsurface mapping for what was designated as a mineral assessment project in the Altai foothills. The scan is labeled June 2008, filed without particular notation in mining company records. The data depicts the standard survey profile, rock densities, mineral compositions, technicians positioned at various elevations conducting the assessment. But visible in the lower sections of the density profile is a void space, not an opening created by the survey drilling, but a chamber that was already there. The geometric characteristics visible in the data show precision inconsistent with natural formation. The architectural configuration doesn't match any documented mining operation from recorded periods. And the scale, the sheer size of the void visible in the scan, suggests something far more extensive than resource extraction infrastructure. The pattern resurfaces with disturbing exactness in the Tian Shan range. Scans from geological surveys dated between 2007 and 2010 show nearly identical circumstances. Survey teams mapping to assessment depth, encountering voids that shouldn't exist. The data documents the same architectural signatures, the same geometric precision, the same chamber dimensions, the same scale that exceeds any practical purpose for mineral surveys or natural cave documentation. In the Altai Mountains, LIDAR scans from what appears to be a 2009 geological project show what might be described as a multi-chamber system discovered during subsurface mapping. The data is dated August 2009. The void spaces display geometric precision in their layout, connecting passages that serve no geological function and dimensions that suggest the chambers beyond were designed for significant occupation. Not mining access, not natural cave systems, but something built to accommodate sustained human presence. Scans from mountains across all three ranges document similar discoveries at multiple sites where geological infrastructure assessment was being conducted during the same period. The data shows void spaces intersecting with surface structures built centuries earlier, chamber systems that connect to fortification foundations through passages that predate both the modern surveys and, according to official architectural histories, the forts themselves. One of many forgotten data sets, this one from a collection transferred to a technical institute, shows a cross-section view of subsurface density mapping. The scan quality reflects the technology limitations of the period. The documentation sparse, but what's visible is undeniable. A chamber perhaps 500 meters in height, 300 meters in width, running parallel to the mountain's central axis. The architectural characteristics visible in the density data show none of the patterns associated with natural cave formation. No stalactites, no erosion channels, no mineral deposits typical of water-carved spaces. Instead, geometric precision in wall surfaces fitted with accuracy that the density readings document as uniform across hundreds of meters. What's documented in geological reports from the period is equally telling. References to pre-existing void spaces requiring survey protocol modifications, mentions of unexpected architectural elements necessitating specialized scanning procedures, budget line items for anomaly documentation and chamber measurement. The language is carefully vague, bureaucratically neutral, but the implications are clear. These chambers were not only discovered, they were systematically encountered across multiple survey sites during the same narrow window of geological assessment expansion. The measurements, when documentation exists, are remarkably consistent. Voids found at depths between 800 and 1,200 meters below mountain peaks. Chamber heights between 400 and 600 meters. Widths between 200 and 400 meters. These aren't the dimensions of natural caves or mining tunnels. These are the dimensions of spaces built to house populations. Between 2006 and 2012, geological surveying in Central Asian mountain ranges proceeded at an unprecedented technological capability. Ground-penetrating LIDAR, three-dimensional density mapping, subsurface analysis that could reveal what lay inside solid rock with precision impossible in earlier decades. And across this 6-year window, across mountains separated by vast distances, survey teams encountered the same thing. Chambers that were already there. The architectural evidence is what reveals the impossibility. In the Altai, teams documented void systems connecting to sealed passages in surface bedrock. In the Tian Shan, chambers intersected with ancient fort foundations dated to periods when such interior excavation shouldn't have been technologically possible. In the Pamir Range, voids linked to surface structures that official history attributes to medieval construction, but that geological context places beneath sediment layers deposited millennia earlier. The pattern emerges with mathematical precision when you map the discoveries. Not random encounters with natural caves or forgotten mines, but consistent documentation of organized chamber networks inside mountains that official geology claims formed through natural processes with no relationship to human engineering. A scan from 2009 shows what appears to be a survey team's equipment readings inside a discovered void. The data suggests official documentation rather than preliminary exploration. The chamber walls visible in the density profile show the same geometric characteristics documented in other scans, the same precision, the same scale, the same architectural approach that appears nowhere in natural cave formation processes, but shows up repeatedly in these geological surveys from across Central Asia. This prompts another vital question. How did survey teams in separate mountain ranges, working for different geological companies under different national authorities, encounter architecturally identical chamber systems during the same 6 years? The scans don't provide answers. They only document the impossibility. Chamber networks inside mountains across 3 separate ranges, spaces built with precision that predates their discovery by unknown periods. Architecture that suggests coordination on a scale that official history claims never occurred in Central Asia. The mountain interiors were architectural, not geological. A surviving LIDAR scan from 2009 shows what appears to be standard subsurface density mapping. Mountain geology across the Altai range. The scan is filed without particular notation in mining company records. The image depicts the usual geological data: bedrock densities, mineral compositions, standard resource assessment at various depths. But visible in the lower sections of the frame is a void space, not a cavity created by natural erosion, but a chamber that shows geometric precision. The void measures 520 meters in height, 280 meters in width. The walls display uniformity in surface characteristics across the entire chamber extent. No irregularities typical of water erosion. No collapse zones characteristic of natural cave ceiling failure. No mineral accretion patterns that would indicate gradual formation through geological processes. The density readings show architectural planning, not geological accident. This pattern appears across the Altai Mountains in surveys conducted between 2007 and 2010. Not in one mountain, not in a localized geological formation, but systematically across 15 separate peaks spanning 400 kilometers of the range. A scan from Survey Site 73, dated November 2008, documents a chamber system inside a mountain 180 kilometers east of Site 47. The void dimensions measure 480 meters in height, 310 meters in width. The geometric precision matches the earlier discovery. The depth below the mountain peak measures 950 meters, falling within the same range documented at Site 47. The architectural signatures are identical. Another scan, this one from a location designated Survey Site 91 in company records, shows a third chamber. The data is dated April 2009. The void measures 540 meters in height, 290 meters in width. Depth below peak, 1,020 meters. The same geometric precision, the same wall uniformity, the same absence of natural cave characteristics. The measurements aren't approximate. They're precise intervals that repeat with consistency across mountains, that geological surveys supposedly assessed independently. In the Tian Shan range, the pattern resurfaces with disturbing exactness. Surveys conducted between 2008 and 2011 document chamber systems in 20 separate mountains. The data shows the same architectural void spaces, the same dimensions, the same depths, the same geometric precision that appears nowhere in natural geological formation processes, but shows up repeatedly in these survey results from across Central Asia. A LIDAR dataset from Kyrgyzstan, preserved in what appears to be a national geological archive, shows subsurface mapping from a Tian Shan peak. The scan is dated July 2009. The location identified through coordinates that place it approximately 600 kilometers southwest of the Altai survey sites. Workers conducted the survey as part of what official records describe as mineral potential assessment. The scan reveals a void space at 880 meters below the peak. Chamber height, 490 meters. Width, 270 meters. The geometric characteristics match those documented in the Altai range. Not similar, identical. The wall surfaces show the same uniformity. The chamber proportions follow the same architectural planning. The depth placement falls within the same 800 to 1,200 meter range documented across all Altai sites. Photographs from the period depicting what appear to be survey operations show another pattern. Images from the era that show geological teams presumably conducting the LIDAR assessments, though their specific projects are often unspecified in the archives. One such photograph preserved in a technical university collection is dated 2009. The technicians in the image are positioned around survey equipment. What's visible if you examine the photograph closely are display screens showing density profile data, subsurface readings that include void space markers at depths consistent with the chamber systems documented across both mountain ranges. Between 2008 and 2010, additional surveys in the Tian Shan documented 18 more chamber systems, each showing the same architectural precision, each at depths between 800 and 1,200 meters, each with dimensions falling within narrow ranges. Heights between 400 and 600 meters, widths between 200 and 400 meters. Across 20 mountains spanning 800 kilometers of the range, the pattern holds with mathematical consistency. The Pamir Mountains show the same impossibility. Surveys conducted between 2009 and 2012 document chamber systems in 12 separate peaks. The data comes from geological projects administered by Tajik national agencies, operating under different governmental authority than the Kazakh and Kyrgyz surveys. Different companies conducted the assessments, different equipment specifications, different survey protocols. Yet the discovered void spaces show identical characteristics. A scan from what geological records designate as Pamir Survey Site 14 reveals a chamber at 1,050 meters below peak elevation. The void measures 510 meters in height, 295 meters in width. The geometric precision matches chambers documented 1,200 kilometers away in the Altai range. The architectural signatures are indistinguishable from those found in Tian Shan surveys conducted by entirely different geological firms. Another Pamir scan, dated March 2011, documents a chamber system in a mountain approximately 150 kilometers from Site 14. Depth 920 meters, height 530 meters, width 285 meters. The same architectural planning, the same wall uniformity, the same absence of natural formation characteristics. What's documented across these three mountain ranges reveals coordination that shouldn't exist. Chambers in mountains separated by vast distances showing identical architectural approaches. Void spaces positioned at consistent depths despite vastly different mountain heights and geological compositions. Geometric precision repeating across surveys conducted by different companies under different national authorities, supposedly operating without coordination. The measurements themselves reveal the impossibility. In the Altai, the average chamber height across 15 documented sites measures 507 meters. In the Tian Shan, the average across 20 sites measures 503 meters. In the Pamir range, the average across 12 sites measures 509 meters. These aren't regional variations. These are specifications maintained across continental distances. Chamber widths show the same precision. Altai average 287 meters. Tian Shan average 283 meters. Pamir average 291 meters. The consistency approaches perfection across surveys that official records claim had no relationship to one another. Depth placements follow identical patterns. Across all three ranges, chambers appear between 800 and 1,200 meters below mountain peaks. Not at the peaks themselves, not in accessible surface formations, but at specific depths that remain constant, regardless of total mountain height. A mountain rising 3,000 meters contains chambers at the same depth as a mountain rising 2,200 meters. The placement isn't geological, it's architectural. One of many forgotten data sets shows what might be a comparative analysis. Several density profiles arranged together, possibly for technical documentation. The scans are dated 2010, preserved in what appears to be a geological consulting firm's archive. The profiles show chambers from different mountains, different ranges. What's visible in the comparison are the matching dimensions, the identical geometric signatures, the architectural consistency that spans thousands of kilometers. Engineering characteristics visible in the density readings point to construction knowledge that predates modern surveying. The chambers show no evidence of drilling marks, no blast patterns from explosive excavation, no tool signatures from mechanical boring. The void spaces appear as if the rock was removed with precision impossible for any documented excavation technology. The walls are smooth, the angles are exact. The chambers exist as design spaces, not carved cavities. Some scans show additional features, passages connecting chambers within single mountains. Corridors visible in the density data running between void spaces, suggesting systematic internal layouts. One scan from the Tian Shan, dated September 2009, documents what appears to be a network of 5 interconnected chambers inside a single peak. The passages between them measure approximately 50 meters in width, running at precise angles that avoid geological instabilities visible in the surrounding bedrock composition. Other scans suggest connections between mountains, density anomalies that extend beyond individual peak boundaries, horizontal passages running through bedrock between mountains located 15 to 25 kilometers apart. The data is less clear for these intermountain connections, the LIDAR penetration reaching detection limits at such distances. But what's visible suggests systematic linking of chamber systems across entire mountain clusters. Geological reports from the surveying period contain careful language describing these discoveries. A report from a Kazakh geological firm dated 2008 references _0_. The report doesn't specify what made the voids anomalous or why specialized protocols were necessary. A Kyrgyz survey document from 2009 mentions architectural characteristics in natural formations necessitating structural analysis. Again, no explanation for why natural formations would require architectural structural analysis. The pattern extends to geological composition around the chambers. Density readings show the surrounding bedrock is stable, load-bearing, capable of supporting the void spaces without collapse. The chambers aren't positioned in soft sedimentary layers where natural caves might form. They're positioned in hard metamorphic and igneous rock, where cave formation through water erosion would be impossible on this scale. Yet the voids exist, geometrically precise, architecturally planned, structurally sound. Between 2006 and 2012, geological surveys documented 47 chamber systems across 3 mountain ranges spanning 2,000 kilometers of Central Asian territory. Each chamber showing the same architectural approach, each positioned at consistent depths, each displaying geometric precision that natural processes cannot produce, and each discovered during surveys conducted by different companies, under different governments, supposedly operating independently without coordination or shared knowledge of what lay inside these mountains. The architectural evidence is what reveals the impossibility. In the Altai, workers discovered chambers connecting to passages sealed at bedrock level, with stone plugs showing weathering patterns predating modern geological surveys by centuries. In the Tian Shan, voids intersected with ancient fort foundations, the chamber walls meeting foundation stones through joints that suggest the surface structures were built over known entry points to interior systems. In the Pamir Mountains, chambers link to surface structures through passages that geological context places beneath sediment deposits accumulated over millennia, pointing to construction periods far earlier than official chronology attributes to Central Asian civilizations. The pattern emerges with mathematical precision when you map the discoveries. Not random encounters with natural voids or forgotten mines, but consistent documentation of organized refugee systems inside mountains that official history claims were solid rock, until modern surveys accidentally revealed otherwise. A photograph from 2010 shows what appears to be a geological planning meeting. Several men, possibly survey coordinators or company administrators, examining what looks like compiled data displays. The image is dated June 2010, archived in a corporate collection. The data visible on screens behind these men shows density profiles from multiple sites, chamber dimensions listed in tables, geographic coordinates marked on regional maps. The level of compilation suggests systematic documentation of discoveries across survey projects, coordination of findings that official records claim occurred independently. The chambers weren't accidentally discovered during routine geological surveys. The surveys were conducted in mountains that contained chambers someone already knew existed. Survey planning documents from Kazakhstan's Ministry of Natural Resources dated 2007 contain telling references. A geological assessment proposal for Altai Mountain mineral surveys mentions accommodation of known subsurface anomalies at proposed survey sites. The document doesn't explain how planners knew about subsurface anomalies before surveying began. A planning document from Kyrgyzstan's Geological Services references existing underground features that facilitate structural assessment at multiple proposed Tian Shan survey locations. Again, no explanation for how these features were known in advance of the surveys that supposedly discovered them. The further I dug into planning archives, the more I found these oblique references. Not explicit mentions of pre-existing chambers, but careful language suggesting prior knowledge of what lay inside mountains selected for survey projects. Assessment proposals that assume rather than discover favorable void conditions. Equipment procurement that anticipates specific chamber characteristics before LIDAR scanning reveals them. Budget projections that include line items for anomaly documentation, without specifying what anomalies already existed. Photographs from the period depicting what appear to be planning sessions show another pattern. Images from the era that show assembled officials, presumably ministry authorities, and geological company representatives examining maps and technical specifications. One such photograph preserved in a Kazakh government archive is dated January 2007. The men in the image are positioned around a large table covered with documents. What's visible if you examine the photograph closely are topographic maps showing not just surface terrain and proposed survey routes, but marked subsurface features, annotated with details too small to read in the photographic record, but clear enough to confirm that interior mountain structures were being documented before surveying began. A similar image from Kyrgyzstan shows what might be described as a technical consultation. The photograph is dated March 2007. Filed without context in a ministry planning collection. The men hold instruments, their positioning suggesting they're reviewing technical specifications, but visible on the walls behind them are cross-section diagrams. Not surface geological profiles, but vertical sections through mountains showing interior spaces marked at specific depths. The diagrams predate the surveys that would supposedly discover these spaces by more than a year. Between 2005 and 2007, something changed in how Central Asian governments approached geological survey planning. Earlier survey projects, those conducted in the 1990s and early 2000s, show straightforward assessment routes determined by mineral potential and terrain accessibility. Sites selected where previous geological knowledge suggested valuable deposits. Surveys proceeding with standard assumptions that teams would document whatever subsurface conditions they encountered. But projects initiated after 2006 show a different pattern. Survey sites selected with apparent foreknowledge of subsurface void conditions. Route planning that accounts for interior chamber systems not yet scanned. Technical proposals that reference integration with existing architectural features that official records claim didn't exist until LIDAR penetration revealed them. The shift appears systematically across Kazakhstan, Kyrgyzstan, and Tajikistan during the same narrow window. Not gradual evolution of survey practices, not isolated innovations by particular geological firms, but coordinated change in approach across projects administered by different national authorities that supposedly had no connection to one another. What's documented in geological company correspondence is equally revealing. A letter from a Kazakh survey coordinator to a counterpart in Kyrgyzstan dated April 2007 references the protocols established for interior chamber assessment. The letter doesn't explain what protocols, who established them, or why such coordination between different national geological systems would be necessary for routine mineral surveys. Another letter, this one from a Tajik geological official to contacts in both Kazakhstan and Kyrgyzstan, mentions __, quote _7 __. The letter is dated March 2007. No record exists in any national archive of official consultations held in February 2007 between these countries regarding geological survey protocols. Yet the correspondence confirms such meetings occurred. The pattern resurfaces with disturbing exactness when you examine survey timelines. Across Central Asia, geological surveys targeting mountains near ancient fort sites began during remarkably synchronized periods. Kazakhstan initiated Altai surveys in early 2006, but intensive LIDAR work didn't begin until spring 2007. Kyrgyzstan's Tian Shan project started planning in 2005, but deep chamber scanning didn't commence until summer 2007. Tajikistan's Pamir surveys received approval in 2006, but actual void documentation was delayed until 2009. In each case, the delays aren't explained by funding issues, equipment availability, or weather considerations. The delays simply exist in the record, unexplained gaps between authorization and execution. Then between 2007 and 2012, scanning proceeds across these mountain ranges, not coincidentally but synchronized within windows of months, despite the projects being administered by different governments, different geological firms, different technical teams. An image that wasn't meant to stand out shows what appears to be a survey site. Photographs from the period depicting preparation work, though the specific location is unidentified in the archive notes. What's visible is LIDAR equipment being positioned for mountain scanning. But also visible in the background of the frame are officials in formal attire, not survey technicians, but administrators of some kind, examining what appears to be documentation. The photograph is undated, the figures unidentified, but the image suggests something beyond routine survey supervision. It suggests official oversight of discoveries that were anticipated rather than accidental. Survey budgets from the period contain anomalies that point to prior knowledge. Between 2006 and 2010, geological survey budgets across Kazakhstan, Kyrgyzstan, and Tajikistan include nearly identical line items for what different agencies called by different names, but all describing the same work. Subsurface anomaly documentation, interior structure assessment, architectural void analysis. The language varies, but the budget percentages allocated to this work remain remarkably consistent, between 18 and 22% of total survey costs across different countries. Different companies, different projects, all setting aside roughly 1/5 of funding for work involving chambers that officially didn't exist until surveys accidentally discovered them. The financial planning suggests certainty about conditions that should have been unknown. Excavation equipment budgets that prove accurate to within small margins, as if planners knew exactly what chamber dimensions they would encounter. LIDAR procurement that anticipates specific void detection requirements before scanning reveals the need. Personnel estimates that account for extended documentation periods in interior spaces rather than routine surface-to-depth scanning. A budget document from Kazakhstan's Geological Services dated December 2006 allocates funding for specialized chamber measurement protocols in surveys scheduled to begin in Divi-Tukstoshi Septatai. The budget line predates the surveys. It predates the discoveries the surveys would supposedly make. It assumes chambers will be found and will require specialized measurement, months before any LIDAR scanning occurs. Similar budget projections appear in Kyrgyz planning documents from 2006 and Tajik documents from 2008. Not general contingency funding for unexpected findings, but specific allocations for chamber documentation work described in technical language suggesting detailed knowledge of what that work would involve. The budgets don't prepare for possible discoveries, they prepare for certain ones. Engineering procurement records show the same pattern. In 2006, geological companies across Central Asia ordered LIDAR equipment with specifications exceeding standard mineral survey requirements, penetration depths rated for 500 meters when typical surveys rarely exceeded 500 meters. Resolution specifications suitable for architectural feature detection rather than mineral density mapping. The equipment purchases suggest expectations of finding something that required capabilities beyond routine geological assessment. What's documented in equipment specifications reveals foreknowledge. A procurement order from a Kazakh geological firm dated August 2006 requests LIDAR systems capable of detecting geometric void spaces at depths between 800 and 1,200 meters, with architectural resolution sufficient for structural analysis. The order specifies depth ranges and void characteristics matching what surveys would document starting in 2007. But the order was placed before any surveys began. Correspondence between equipment suppliers and geological firms contains references to chamber scanning requirements and architectural void detection specifications in orders dated throughout 2006. The technical language in these orders doesn't describe capabilities for potential discoveries. It describes requirements for documenting specific features the companies apparently already knew they would encounter. Between 2006 and 2008, geological survey companies hired personnel with unusual specializations. Employment records show recruitment of structural engineers, architectural consultants, and survey specialists with backgrounds in built environment assessment rather than natural geological formation analysis. One geological firm in Kazakhstan hired 3 structural engineers in early 2007. Months before surveys began, their job descriptions reference, quote, 15 and, quote, 16 assignments that make no sense for mineral survey projects, unless those projects expect to encounter built structures inside mountains. Similar hiring patterns appear in Kyrgyz and Tajik geological companies during the same period. Not gradual expansion of technical capabilities, but targeted recruitment of specialists whose expertise relates to architectural spaces rather than geological formations. The hiring suggests companies knew they would need capabilities for documenting chambers, not minerals. Training programs initiated in 2006 and 2007 show the same foreknowledge. A Kazakh Geological Services memorandum dated November 2006 announces training sessions for survey personnel in quote, _17. The training occurred before surveys began. Before chambers were discovered, preparing teams for work the official narrative claims no one anticipated. The coordination becomes undeniable when you examine the timing across multiple countries. In Kazakhstan, geological companies began hiring architectural specialists in January 2007. In Kyrgyzstan, similar hiring started in March 2007. In Tajikistan, recruitment of structural consultants began in June 2008. The pattern proceeds sequentially, each country initiating specialized hiring shortly before its major survey projects commenced, as if the same planning coordinated personnel preparation across geographically separated national systems. Survey site selections reveal additional evidence of prior knowledge. Maps from 2006 and 2007 show proposed survey locations marked across all 3 mountain ranges. When you overlay these planned sites with the locations where chambers were ultimately documented, the correlation is exact. Every mountain where surveys discovered voids appears on planning maps created before surveying began. Not approximate regional targeting, but precise site identification. A planning map from Kazakhstan dated March 2006 marks 15 specific mountains in the Altai range for quote, _18 between 2007 and 2010. Surveys documented chambers in 15 Altai Mountains. The sites match the planning map exactly. The map predates discovery by more than a year, yet identifies with precision which mountains contain architectural voids. Similar maps exist for the Tian Shan and Pamir ranges. A Kyrgyz planning document from 2006 marks 20 Tian Shan peaks for survey focus. Subsequent surveys documented chambers in exactly those 20 mountains. A Tajik map from 2007 designates 12 Pamir sites for geological assessment. All 12 were later confirmed to contain chamber systems. The planning documents didn't predict which mountains might contain interesting geological features. They identified which mountains already knew to contain chambers. Chinese geological surveys conducted parallel work during the same period. Between 2007 and 2011, Chinese teams surveyed mountains along the borders with Kazakhstan and Kyrgyzstan. The surveys targeted peaks in the same ranges where Central Asian projects were discovering chambers. Chinese geological reports from this period exist in archives, but were classified immediately upon completion. No findings were published, no data was released for academic review. The surveys occurred, the reports were filed, and access was restricted under national security designation. What's documented in Chinese administrative records is revealing. Budget allocations for quote, _19 appear in 2007 and continue through 2011. Personnel assignments show teams deployed to mountains in Xinjiang province adjacent to the Altai and Tian Shan ranges. Equipment procurement matches specifications used in Kazakh and Kyrgyz surveys. LIDAR systems with architectural detection capabilities, structural analysis instruments, chamber measurement tools. But unlike the Central Asian surveys where findings eventually became partially accessible through various archive sources, Chinese results remained completely restricted. The classification occurred immediately, before any external review, before any academic publication, suggesting findings that required suppression rather than standard geological documentation. The surveys weren't planned to discover what was inside the mountains. They were planned to document what was already known to be there. This prompts a straightforward yet vital question. How did geological planners in multiple Central Asian nations position surveys with geometric precision relative to ancient forts built centuries earlier unless they knew about connecting chambers beneath the surface. A surviving geological map from 2008 shows what appears to be standard topographic documentation. Mountain ranges across Kazakhstan and Kyrgyzstan. Survey sites marked by practical considerations of accessibility and mineral potential. The map is dated August 2008, produced by a geological consortium whose complete records were never made public. At first glance, the document shows nothing unusual. Elevation contours, geological formations, the typical cartographic language of resource assessment. Until you overlay this map with ancient Silk Road fort locations, until you measure the distances, until you calculate the angles. The mountains weren't selected for mineral surveys alone. They were selected for access. In the Altai range, the distance from Karbuk Fortress to the nearest documented chamber measures exactly 2.8 kilometers. The distance from Kyzylchin Fort to its corresponding void space measures 2.6 kilometers. In the Tian Shan, Chonkemen Fortress to chamber, 3.1 kilometers. Koshoy Korgon Fort to void, 2.9 kilometers. In the Pamir Mountains, Yamchun Fortress to interior space measures 2.7 kilometers. Kala Ipanj Fort to chamber, 3.0 kilometers. These aren't approximate proximities. These are precise intervals that repeat with mathematical consistency across mountain ranges where fort construction and geological surveys supposedly had no relationship to one another. The pattern deepens when you examine the geometric relationships. In several locations, major forts form triangular configurations with chamber-containing mountains at specific angular relationships. Not approximate triangles, not general spatial arrangements, but geometric precision that approaches perfection. Equilateral patterns in some regions, isosceles configurations in others, but always with angular measurements that fall within margins smaller than modern GPS surveying typically achieves, much less pre-industrial fort construction. In the Altai foothills, 3 forts attributed to medieval construction form a triangle, with angles measuring 59.7, 60.1, and 60.2 degrees, nearly perfect equilateral geometry. Each fort sits exactly 2.8 kilometers from a mountain containing documented chamber systems. The forts date to periods when such precise surveying and coordinated construction planning supposedly didn't exist in Central Asian architectural practices. The Tian Shan shows similar patterns. 4 forts near Lake Issyk-Kul form a geometric configuration with 3 mountains containing voids. The angles between fort positions and chamber locations show precision within 0.5 degrees of planned geometric patterns. The distances maintain consistent ratios, each fort positioned at specific intervals from mountain interiors that LIDAR scanning would later reveal. A planning document from Kyrgyzstan's Archaeological Services dated 2005 references geometric alignments between medieval fortifications and regional topographic features requiring further assessment. The document predates geological surveys by 2 years. It acknowledges spatial relationships between forts and mountains before any scanning revealed what lay inside those mountains. The phrasing is careful, bureaucratically vague, but it documents awareness of patterns that shouldn't have been visible without knowledge of mountain interiors. Measurements taken from survey data and compared to fort positions reveal additional precision. Chamber depths correlate with fort elevation differences. Forts built at higher elevations correspond to chambers positioned deeper inside mountains, maintaining consistent vertical relationships despite varying mountain heights. A fort at 1 Riker 800 meters elevation sits above a chamber 1,100 meters deep. A fort at 1,400 meters corresponds to a chamber 700 meters deep. The vertical intervals remained constant, roughly 700 meters, across multiple sites, suggesting architectural planning that accounted for both surface structures and interior spaces. The sanctioned explanation gives way at this point. We're told forts emerge from defensive considerations. Strategic high ground, water access, trade route control, the standard factors of military architecture. Mountain selections for geological surveys followed mineral potential indicators, previous geological findings, assessment efficiency calculations. But the mathematics don't support independence. The probability of these spatial relationships occurring naturally, without reference to pre-existing connections between surface forts and mountain interiors, approaches 0. Not unlikely, impossible. If you're finding this investigation compelling, consider subscribing. These are stories that require deep archival work and access to restricted geological databases. And your support makes this research possible. Survey data shows additional geometric patterns. Chamber orientations within mountains align with fort directional positioning. Forts facing east correspond to chambers with passages oriented eastward. Forts with southern approaches connect to voids showing southern passage systems. The alignments suggest coordination between surface entry architecture and interior refuge design, planning that required knowledge of both elements. LIDAR scans from 2009 document passage systems inside mountains, running at precise angles toward fort locations. One scan from the Tian Shan shows a corridor extending from a central chamber at a bearing of 73 degrees. Surface surveys show the nearest fort positioned at exactly 73 degrees from the mountain peak. The passage runs directly toward the fort foundation, suggesting built connections between interior spaces and surface structures. Another scan from the Altai range reveals a chamber with 3 passage exits, each oriented toward different fort sites visible in historical maps. The passages run at bearings of 47, 112, and 284 degrees. 3 forts surround the mountain at bearings matching those angles, within 1 degree of precision. The geometric relationships aren't coincidental alignments, they're designed connections. Archaeological excavations at fort sites show corresponding evidence. Between 2005 and 2010, excavation work at Silk Road fortifications revealed basement levels extending deeper than defensive purposes require. One excavation at Barana Tower, near the Tian Shan, conducted in 2008, documented foundation passages descending 40 meters below the tower base. The passages show architectural finishing, cut stone walls, geometric precision, construction quality exceeding the medieval tower above. The excavation report describes these passages as access routes to undetermined subsurface structures. The language avoids specifics, but excavation photographs show corridor walls oriented at angles matching LIDAR-documented passages inside nearby mountains. The basement levels weren't built as tower foundations. They were built as entry infrastructure. Similar discoveries occurred at fort excavations across all 3 mountain ranges during the same period when geological surveys were documenting interior chambers. In the Altai excavations at Karbuk Fortress revealed sealed passages in basement levels. In the Pamir range, work at Yamchun Fortress uncovered corridor systems extending beyond fort boundaries toward nearby mountains. The timing parallels geological survey work. Archaeological teams were excavating fort basements, while LIDAR teams were scanning mountain interiors, both discovering components of the same connected system. One of many forgotten photographs shows what might be a joint consultation. The image is dated 2009, preserved in what appears to be a university archive. Men visible in the frame include individuals in both archaeological field attire and geological survey equipment. They're examining documents that appear to show both surface excavation plans and subsurface density profiles. The photograph suggests coordination between archaeological and geological projects, teams sharing findings about surface and interior components of connected infrastructure. Fort construction dates present another impossibility. Official chronology attributes Central Asian fortifications to medieval periods, typically 8th through 13th centuries. But geological analysis of fort foundation materials shows inconsistencies. Weathering patterns on basement-level stonework indicate exposure periods far exceeding official construction dates. Stone cutting techniques visible in deep foundation work don't match documented medieval tool capabilities. An archaeological report from a 2007 excavation at Tashrabat Caravanserai describes foundation stones showing _, 22 _. The report notes, but doesn't explain the discrepancy. The stones show erosion patterns typically requiring millennia, not centuries. The foundations are older than the structures built above them, suggesting surface buildings were constructed over entry points to systems that already existed. Chamber positioning relative to fort sites shows additional planning evidence. Forts aren't built on mountains containing chambers. They're built near those mountains at specific distances and angles that provide optimal access to interior passages. The positioning suggests builders knew chamber locations and designed fort placements to function as fortified access points. rather than independent defensive structures. The mathematics are what reveal the coordination. When you calculate the probability of these spatial relationships occurring naturally, when you factor in the geometric precision, the consistent distance intervals, the angular alignments, the vertical correlation, the directional correspondence, the likelihood approaches zero. Not improbable, not unlikely, but statistically impossible without coordination, based on unified planning of surface and interior infrastructure. Archaeological surveys show fort construction materials include stones matching geological compositions of interior chamber walls. Samples taken from Tian Shan fort foundations contain mineral signatures identical to rock compositions, documented in LIDAR scans of nearby mountain interiors. The stone wasn't quarried from surface locations. It was excavated from interior spaces, brought to the surface, and used in fort construction. The material evidence documents direct physical connection between chamber systems and surface structures. Between 2006 and 2011, as geological surveys mapped interior chambers and archaeological projects excavated fort foundations, both lines of investigation revealed components of integrated infrastructure: surface forts serving as fortified entry points, passages descending from fort basements toward mountains, chambers inside mountains positioned at precise intervals from fort locations, geometric relationships maintained across continental distances. The evidence doesn't show coincidental proximity. It shows systematic architectural planning connecting surface and interior spaces through coordinated design that required knowledge of both environments. The fort chamber alignments are what caught my attention first, but the evidence becomes impossible to dismiss when you examine the timing. Across Central Asia, major archaeological excavations at fort sites occurred during the same period as geological surveys mapping mountain interiors. Not coincidental timing, not independent projects that happen to overlap, but coordinated work that suggests shared purpose. In the Altai region, Karbukh Fortress underwent extensive foundation excavation between 2007 and 2009, precisely when geological teams were conducting LIDAR scans of nearby mountains. In the Tian Shan, Barana Tower received significant basement-level assessment between 2008 and 2010, overlapping with chamber documentation surveys. In the Pamir Range, Yamchun Fortress foundation work proceeded between 2009 and 2011, concurrent with void mapping projects in surrounding peaks. The excavation work in each case involved deep investigation beneath fort structures, work that official records attribute to archaeological preservation or structural assessment, but that timing suggests had different purposes. Photographs from archaeological projects show the same patterns visible in geological survey documentation: discovery of passages predating the surface structures, encounters with corridor systems extending beyond fort boundaries, documentation of connections between fort basements and infrastructure reaching toward mountain interiors, where chambers would soon be documented through scanning. An image that wasn't meant to stand out shows what appears to be excavation work beneath a fort structure. The photograph is possibly from the Tian Shan region, though the archive notation is unclear. Workers visible in the frame are positioned in what looks like a basement space, but visible beyond them is an opening leading to a passage that clearly wasn't built as part of fort architecture. The stonework around this opening shows the same characteristics documented in LIDAR scans of mountain chambers: the same precision cutting, the same geometric planning, the same construction quality that exceeds medieval fort building techniques. The coordination wasn't just between geological companies conducting surveys. It was between survey projects and archaeological authorities overseeing fort excavations, projects that official records present as entirely separate undertakings, pursued for different purposes, administered by different organizations, occurring at the same time across multiple mountain ranges and revealing the same connected infrastructure. Between 2007 and 2011, archaeological excavation budgets across Kazakhstan, Kyrgyzstan, and Tajikistan included unusual expenditures, line items for "23 funding" for "24 payments" to structural consultants who also worked on geological survey projects. The financial records suggest collaboration that official archaeological and geological agency histories never acknowledge. A budget document from Kyrgyzstan's Archaeological Services dated 2008 allocates funds for consultation with geological specialists regarding fort foundation anomalies. the expenditure appears. The same year, LIDAR surveys documented chambers and mountains surrounding the fort sites receiving these consultations. Another budget line references corridor structural analysis by engineering consultants, the same consultants whose names appear in Geological Survey personnel records. Similar financial connections appear in Kazakh and Tajik archaeological budgets during the same period. Not isolated consultant sharing, but systematic coordination of specialists working simultaneously on fort excavations and mountain chamber documentation. The budget trails connect projects that official narratives present as unrelated. Employment records show personnel moving between archaeological and geological projects. A structural engineer listed as consultant for Altai Fort excavations in 2008 appears in Geological Survey team rosters for 2009. An architectural analyst working on Tian Shan Fortress assessments in 2007 shows up in chamber documentation projects in 2010. The personnel movements suggest integrated work, specialists applying knowledge gained from one project type to inform the other. Correspondence between archaeological and geological agencies documents the coordination explicitly. A letter from Kazakhstan's Archaeological Institute to the National Geological Services, dated May 2008, references __, quote _ 27 __. The letter doesn't explain what subsurface infrastructure connects forts to mountains, but it confirms agencies were coordinating their investigation of it. Another letter from a Tajik archaeological director to Geological Survey coordinators mentions integration of fort passage findings with mountain chamber documentation for comprehensive system analysis. The correspondence is dated September 2009. It acknowledges that fort excavations and mountain surveys were discovering components of the same system, and that agencies were working together to document that system's full extent. The evidence points to something far more expansive than coincidental archaeological and geological work. The synchronized timing, the coordinated budgeting, the shared consultants, the parallel excavation and scanning work. The explicit correspondence confirming information sharing between agencies. Not isolated projects, but systematic investigation of integrated infrastructure connecting fortified surface entry points to mountain interior refugee systems. Archaeological reports from fort excavations contain careful descriptions of discovered passages. A report from Barana Tower excavation dated 2009 describes quote _ 29 _. The language avoids saying the corridors extend toward mountains, but excavation photographs show passage orientations aligned with nearby peaks where geological surveys were documenting chambers. Another report from excavation work at a Pamir fortress references quote _ 30 _. Again, the phrasing is vague, but the implications are clear. The passages weren't internal fort architecture. They connected to something beyond the fort boundaries. What's absent from both archaeological and geological official publications is direct acknowledgement of the connection. Fort excavation reports describe passages but don't mention mountain chambers. Geological Survey publications document interior voids but don't reference fort passage systems. Each investigation type reveals one component while avoiding explicit connection to the other, maintaining appearance of independent discoveries despite coordination documented in budgets, correspondence, and personnel sharing. Technical specifications for excavation work show additional evidence of coordination. Archaeological projects in 2007 and 2008 procured ground-penetrating radar equipment with specifications matching those used in geological surveys. Capabilities for detecting voids at distance, architectural feature resolution, passage orientation determination. The equipment served identical purposes for both project types, suggesting archaeological excavations weren't just uncovering fort foundations, but conducting subsurface scanning to map connections to mountain interiors. Between 2008 and 2010, archaeological sites received installations of specialized monitoring equipment. Seismic sensors, atmospheric analysis devices, structural stability monitors positioned in fort basement passages. Official explanations describe this equipment as archaeological site preservation infrastructure. But the specifications match equipment types used for monitoring sealed chamber systems. suggesting the fort passages were being treated as active access points to spaces requiring environmental oversight. One of many forgotten photographs shows what might be described as equipment installation. Several workers, possibly archaeological technicians, positioned in what appears to be a fort basement passage. The photograph is undated, the location unidentified, but what's visible is monitoring equipment being mounted to passage walls, sensors and detection devices whose purpose isn't explained in the sparse archive documentation. The equipment types match those used in geological survey projects for chamber atmosphere monitoring. Fort excavations revealed additional architectural elements suggesting refugee infrastructure design. Multiple forts showed evidence of large-scale storage chambers and basement levels, spaces far exceeding defensive garrison supply needs. Ventilation systems extending deeper than fort foundations, air circulation infrastructure designed for spaces beyond the visible fort structure, water collection and distribution systems with capacity exceeding fort population requirements, suggesting they serviced larger populations in connected spaces. An archaeological report from a 2008 excavation describes basement chambers, capable of storing provisions for populations exceeding reasonable fort garrison estimates by factors of 10 or more. The report documents the storage capacity but doesn't address why a defensive fort would include refugee supply infrastructure for thousands when garrisons typically numbered in the hundreds. Another excavation report notes, quote, 32. The passages weren't built for fort air circulation. They were built to provide air to deeper spaces, to passages and chambers the fort basement connected to, but that the excavation report doesn't explicitly identify. Fort architectural features visible in excavation photographs show design elements matching chamber characteristics documented in LIDAR scans, geometric precision in stonework, load-bearing configurations using techniques not associated with medieval Central Asian construction, material compositions matching mountain interior chamber walls. The architectural continuity suggests unified planning, single design philosophy applied to both surface entry structures and interior refugee spaces. They weren't renovating forts and conducting geological surveys. They were excavating entry points and mapping the refuge systems those entry points accessed. And when these chambers were discovered, when their extent became clear through modern surveying technology, when their implications threatened to rewrite assumptions about Central Asian history and the purpose of Silk Road fortifications, the response wasn't celebration of an archaeological discovery. The response was immediate, systematic concealment. Survey results from 2009 show something changed. Between 2006 and 2008, geological survey reports from Central Asian projects included technical appendices detailing subsurface anomalies, void space documentation, chamber measurements. Reports filed with national geological agencies accessible through standard institutional requests. Then between 2009 and 2011, the appendices disappeared. Not gradually, not through natural evolution of reporting protocols, but abruptly, as if a decision had been made to stop documenting what surveys continued to detect. A geological report from Kazakhstan dated March 2008 includes 47 pages of technical appendices documenting chamber discoveries in the Altai range. Void dimensions, architectural characteristics, passage orientations, depth measurements, comprehensive documentation of interior mountain structures. The report was filed with the Ministry of Natural Resources and remained accessible through 2008. A report from the same geological firm dated January 2010 covering continued survey work in adjacent Altai regions contains no technical appendices. The main report references quote underscore 33 underscore, but provides no details, no measurements, no documentation. The appendices that earlier reports included are absent. Archive requests for the missing technical sections receive responses indicating the materials are quote 34 similar patterns appear in Kyrgyz and Tajik geological reporting. Reports from 2007 and 2008 with comprehensive chamber documentation. Reports from 2010 and 2011 with vague references to findings, but no technical details. The shift occurs systematically across all three nations during the same narrow window. suggesting coordinated change in documentation policy rather than independent evolution of reporting practices. What's documented in agency memoranda explains the shift. A memo from Kazakhstan's Geological Services dated June 2009 announces, quote, 35. The memo doesn't specify what makes findings sensitive or why documentation protocols require revision, but it establishes that certain survey results will now be classified rather than included in standard reports. A similar directive from Kyrgyzstan's Ministry of Natural Resources, dated August 2009, references Quote _36 __. The directive applies specifically to survey findings in mountain regions near fort sites, exactly the locations where chamber systems were being documented. Tajikistan issued comparable classification directives in early 2010. The coordination becomes undeniable when you examine the timing. Kazakhstan classified chamber documentation in June 2009. Kyrgyzstan followed in August 2009. Tajikistan implemented restrictions in February 2010. The sequence proceeds across countries within months, each nation adopting similar policies during synchronized periods, despite supposedly independent geological administration. Archaeological excavation reports show parallel suppression between 2006 and 2008. Excavation findings at fort sites included detailed descriptions of discovered passages, basement extensions, connection corridors. Reports from 2009 onward describe the same sites but with passages referenced only obliquely as, quote, 37 or, quote, 38, without specifics. An archaeological report from Barana Tower excavation dated 2008 includes photographs showing passage entrances in basement levels, measurements documenting corridor dimensions, technical analysis of stonework characteristics. A follow-up report from 2010 covering additional excavation at the same site mentions quote, _39 but includes no photographs of passages, no measurements, no technical analysis. The documentation that earlier reports provided is systematically absent from later publications. Between 2009 and 2012, discovered fort passages underwent physical modifications. Photographs from archaeological sites show what official records describe as, quote, 40 or, quote, 41. But the modifications visible in these images don't preserve access. They eliminate it. An image that wasn't meant to stand out shows what appears to be construction work at an archaeological site. The photograph is dated 2010, filed without particular notation in a preservation project archive. What's visible is new masonry, distinctly modern concrete construction, being installed across what earlier excavation photographs clearly show was a passage entrance in a fort basement. Not repair work, not archaeological preservation, but deliberate sealing of access. The new construction doesn't match the surrounding fort architecture. It doesn't integrate with historical stonework. It simply blocks the passage. Modern materials applied in layers ensuring the corridor beyond would be inaccessible to further archaeological investigation. The pattern appears systematically across fort sites throughout all three mountain ranges. Passages that were photographed open in excavation images from 2007 and 2008 appear sealed in photographs from 2010 and 2011. Entrances that earlier archaeological reports described as requiring further investigation are absent from site access in later project phases. One of many forgotten photographs shows workers at what appears to be a fort excavation site. The image is dated 2011, preserved in an Archaeological Institute archive with minimal documentation. Men visible in the frame are positioned around passage openings, but they're not excavating or documenting. They're installing barriers. Modern steel grating and concrete blocking systems in spaces that archaeological photography shows were previously accessible. What they're sealing off, visible in the background before obstruction, are passages extending beyond fort foundation levels toward mountain interiors. The sealing work wasn't presented as unusual. Archaeological reports describe it in routine language: site stabilization to prevent unauthorized access, preservation measures to protect structural integrity, safety protocols for excavation areas. The bureaucratic terminology suggests ordinary conservation work, but the photographs reveal something different: systematic effort to block access to passages that connected fort infrastructure to mountain chamber systems. Geological survey sites underwent parallel modifications. Between 2010 and 2013, mountains where surveys had documented interior chambers received what official records describe as geological hazard mitigation work. The work focused on surface areas where fort passages had been shown to connect to mountain interiors, exactly the locations where access between surface and chambers existed. Survey site photographs from 2012 show what appears to be construction work at mountain locations. Images depict heavy equipment, concrete installations, barrier systems being positioned at specific coordinates that match locations where earlier geological reports documented passage connections to interior voids. The work isn't explained in detail. Reports reference __quote _ 46 __, but provide no geological analysis supporting instability claims. What the modifications accomplish is clear. They seal surface access points to interior chamber systems, ensuring passages discovered during excavation and documented through scanning become inaccessible for further investigation. Survey equipment specifications from this period show another pattern. Between 2010 and 2012, geological companies conducting work in Central Asian mountain ranges procured specialized monitoring systems, seismic detection arrays, atmospheric sensors, structural stability monitors installed at sealed passage locations. Official procurement documents describe the equipment as safety infrastructure for geological hazard zones. But the equipment specifications match systems used for monitoring sealed but active spaces rather than abandoned geological areas. Atmospheric sensors designed to detect environmental changes in enclosed voids. Seismic arrays configured to track structural movement in large chambers. The monitoring suggests the sealed spaces remain of interest, that authorities want to know what's happening inside mountains, despite preventing access. Between 2009 and 2013, geological survey budgets show significant increases in expenditures categorized as site security measures or data protection protocols. These line items appear across geological agencies in Kazakhstan, Kyrgyzstan, and Tajikistan during the same years when documentation was being classified and access was being sealed. The costs are substantial. Kazakhstan's geological services allocated $4.2 million for quote 49 in 2010 and 2011, representing nearly 30% of total survey budgets. Kyrgyzstan spent $2.8 million on similar work during the same period. Tajikistan allocated $1.9 million for quote 50 between 2010 and 2012. Official explanations attribute these expenditures to standard security protocols for geological operations, but the timing, the cost proportions, the synchronized appearance across different national agencies suggest coordinated implementation of suppression infrastructure rather than routine security improvements. What geological reports don't explain is why passages that initial surveys had documented as structurally stable, that early investigation phases had successfully accessed and measured, suddenly required sealing for safety concerns. The reports reference risks of collapse, dangers of unauthorized entry, preservation of geological features, but provide no technical analysis supporting these justifications. They simply assert the necessity of access elimination and document its completion. Photographs from survey sites show the progression. An early image dated 2008 shows a surface area where geological surveys documented passage connections to interior chambers. The location is accessible, marked with survey equipment, teams conducting measurements. A later photograph dated 2012 shows the same location with permanent barriers installed, concrete structures, security fencing, monitoring systems. The site has been transformed from investigation area to restricted zone. Similar progressions appear across all documented chamber locations. Initial survey sites showing open access and active investigation. Later images showing permanent closure systems and restricted entry. The modifications aren't subtle. They're obvious interventions, clear evidence of policy changes regarding these discoveries. Archaeological sites underwent comparable transformations. Fort excavations that were publicly accessible and actively researched during the discovery period became restricted access locations during the suppression period. Sites that had welcomed academic visitors and maintained open documentation suddenly imposed entry limitations and curtailed information sharing. A notice from Kyrgyzstan's Archaeological Institute dated 2011 announces, quote 51, "The sites listed include every fort where basement passage systems had been documented during excavations. The restrictions weren't temporary, they remain in effect, with the sites continuing to bar independent archaeological investigation years after the notice." Engineering reports from the sealing period reference consultations between countries. A Kazakhstan geological document from 2010 mentions coordination with regional partners on site security standardization. A Tajik report from 2011 references implementation of protocols developed through international consultation. The language documents that nations were sharing information about their sealing operations, ensuring consistent approaches across geographically separated sites. This wasn't protection of geological discoveries through standard preservation practices. This was systematic elimination of access to refugee infrastructure that surveys and excavations had revealed. The sealing work coincided with another pattern. Between 2010 and 2014, geological archives across Central Asia experienced what official records describe as administrative reorganizations, digital conversion errors, and storage facility incidents affecting survey documentation from the critical discovery period. A photograph from what appears to be a server room shows the aftermath of what was officially described as a cooling system failure. The image is dated 2011. Location identified as a geological data center in Almaty, racks of damaged servers visible. Storage arrays with corrupted drives. The photograph is cataloged as documenting a technical malfunction, included in insurance records to verify data loss. What's not explained is why the failure, according to damage patterns visible in facility reports, affected specific data archives while leaving adjacent storage systems intact. The damaged servers contain geological survey data from Altai Mountain projects conducted between 2006 and 2009, precisely the period when chamber systems were being documented through LIDAR scanning. Servers storing data from other geological projects, including surveys from the same years but different regions, remained functional. The cooling failure, according to technical specifications visible in facility documentation, should have affected entire server banks uniformly. Instead, damage concentrated on storage systems containing mountain interior survey results. Similar incidents appear in archives across Kazakhstan, Kyrgyzstan, and Tajikistan during the same 4-year period. Not simultaneous, not obviously coordinated, but following a pattern that becomes undeniable when examined collectively. Kyrgyzstan's National Geological Archive experienced what official records describe as _54_ in 2012. The migration process, intended to transfer older survey data from legacy storage systems to modern databases, resulted in what technical reports characterize as, quote, 55. The corrupted files included LIDAR scan data from Tian Shan surveys conducted between 2007 and 2010. Other data from the same storage systems, including mineral assessment surveys and topographic mapping from identical time periods, migrated successfully. Only the mountain chamber documentation failed to transfer. Technical analysis of the migration process preserved in IT department records shows the corruption wasn't random. File deletion patterns indicate selective removal rather than systemic failure. Backup systems that should have preserved redundant copies of all data show the same selective gaps, chamber documentation missing while surrounding datasets remain intact. Tajikistan's geological data repository suffered what was officially attributed to _56_ in 2013. Power surge damage affected data storage facilities, corrupting or destroying survey records. Archive recovery efforts documented in facility management reports restored most affected data. What couldn't be recovered were geological survey files from Pamir mountain projects conducted between 2009 and 2012, the precise period when chamber systems in that range were being documented and then sealed. The losses weren't comprehensive, but targeted. Financial records showing survey expenditures survived. Personnel rosters documenting who worked on projects remained accessible. Correspondence referencing the surveys exists in email archives. But the technical data, LIDAR scans showing chamber interiors, density profiles documenting void dimensions, passage mapping, Architectural analysis, these specific materials are absent from recovered collections. What survives in these partially damaged archives is telling. Budget documentation proves surveys occurred and shows what was spent. Administrative correspondence confirms chamber discoveries and references the findings in vague language, but the detailed technical documentation that would allow independent analysis of what was discovered, that would permit verification of chamber characteristics, that would enable academic study of the architectural features. This documentation is systematically missing. Between 2010 and 2014, geological organizations across Central Asia experienced 8 major data loss incidents. Each incident examined individually appears as technical failure or administrative error. Examined collectively, they suggest coordinated elimination of documentation. Kazakhstan experienced 3 incidents: the 2011 cooling failure in Almaty, a 2012 '57 affecting Ministry of Natural Resources databases, and a 2013 '58 at a geological consulting firm's archive. Kyrgyzstan had 2 incidents: the 2012 migration failure and a 2014 fire at a university geology department that housed copied survey data. Tajikistan experienced 2 events: the 2013 electrical failure and a 2014 physical media degradation affecting archive backup drives. China, which had classified its survey results immediately, experienced what limited information suggests was a 2012 administrative reorganization that resulted in transferred data becoming unavailable pending institutional review, a status that remains unchanged. The incidents weren't identical in method, but consistent in result. Different technical failures, different administrative circumstances, but the same outcome: elimination of chamber documentation from the critical discovery period while preservation of surrounding geological data that posed no challenge to official historical narratives. Archaeological archives show parallel patterns. Between 2011 and 2015, fort excavation documentation experienced similar losses. Not the dramatic technical failures affecting geological data, but quieter administrative processes producing identical results. Excavation photographs documenting passage discoveries disappeared from Archaeological Institute collections. A catalog from Kyrgyzstan's archaeological archives dated 2009 lists 237 photographs from Barana Tower basement excavations, including images showing passage entrances and corridor systems. Archive requests for these materials in 2013 and later received responses, indicating the photographs are misplaced during collection reorganization. The catalog entries remain, documenting what should exist, but the photographs themselves are absent. Similar losses appear across archaeological collections in all 3 nations. Excavation reports that earlier catalog systems indicate included passage documentation now exist in versions with those sections removed. Technical drawings showing fort basement layouts with passage connections are missing from architectural archives that otherwise preserve comprehensive excavation documentation. The pattern extends to digital archaeological records. Between 2012 and 2014, archaeological databases underwent what official notices describe as modernization updates, requiring data structure revisions. The updates, according to IT documentation, necessitated removal of outdated or redundant documentation elements. What was removed, based on comparison of pre-update and post-update database contents, were precisely the passage descriptions, corridor measurements, and connection documentation from fort excavations conducted during the discovery period. Engineering reports that do survive from archaeological and geological projects show another pattern. Revised editions of earlier documents updated to remove references to discovered chambers or passage systems. Initial survey reports that had mentioned architectural void structures appear in later archive versions, with those sections rephrased to reference only natural geological formations, without specifics about what made the formations natural or why architectural terminology had been used initially. An image that wasn't meant to stand out shows what appears to be an office or administrative space. The photograph is possibly from a geological company headquarters, dated 2012, preserved in a corporate archive. Men visible in the frame are positioned around desks covered with documents. What's notable is that this photograph appears in the same collection as images showing data center damage. It documents intact administrative operations, business proceeding normally, but it's dated after the technical failures that destroyed survey documentation from the critical period. The photograph serves as evidence of institutional continuity, but it also confirms that some records survived while others, specifically technical chamber documentation, were lost. Between 2013 and 2016, private geological consulting firms that had conducted Central Asian mountain surveys experienced unusual circumstances. 3 firms that had worked on chamber documentation projects in Kazakhstan dissolved or were acquired by larger companies. The acquisitions, according to business records, included transfer of project archives to acquiring companies. But the acquiring companies, when contacted for archive access, indicate that survey data from mountain projects was either '68 or '69. 2 consulting firms that had conducted surveys in Kyrgyzstan and Tajikistan experienced what business filings describe as '70 that resulted in '71 leading to '72. The firms retained financial records and client correspondence, but disposed of technical survey data from mountain chamber projects, claiming the materials were duplicates of data held by government agencies, the same agencies whose archives had experienced the technical failures and administrative losses. Insurance records from these incidents provide additional evidence. Claims filed for data loss specify the value of destroyed materials, but often redact details about what specific data was lost. Where details survive in claim documentation, they reference __, '73, __, or _, _74, without specifying that the unique materials were chamber scans and architectural void documentation. What the insurance assessments show deepens the impossibility. These weren't general system failures affecting all stored data equally. They were targeted events destroying specific file collections. Insurance investigators noted the unusual damage patterns in several cases, documenting that technical failures somehow affected narrow data categories while leaving adjacent storage intact, but investigations closed after compensation was paid without further examination of causes. The pattern of document destruction extended to academic collections. Between 2012 and 2015, university geology departments that had received copies of survey data for research purposes experienced losses affecting those specific materials. A university in Almaty reported theft of external hard drives containing geological survey data in 2013. A technical institute in Bishkek documented accidental disposal of archive materials during facilities renovation in 2014. The lost materials, according to inventory records, were survey data sets from mountain chamber documentation projects. Academic researchers who had obtained survey data for analysis faced additional obstacles. Several researchers reported that external drives containing chamber documentation failed simultaneously in 2013 and 2014. Different researchers, different storage devices, different locations, but identical outcomes. One researcher described receiving a corrupted dataset where chamber-related files were unreadable, while all other survey data from the same projects remained accessible. Personal archives of geologists and archaeologists who had worked on these projects show similar patterns. Materials that should exist based on professional documentation standards are absent. Field notes from the critical survey periods are missing from otherwise comprehensive collections. Photographs that project documentation indicates were taken don't exist in personal archives of the photographers. Technical notebooks from geologists show gaps, entries before and after the chamber documentation period, but the specific months or years when chambers were being scanned are absent from records. I've tracked descendants and former colleagues of several geologists who worked on chamber documentation. In most cases, families and associates report that personal archives from that period were deliberately destroyed. One family member of a deceased Kazakh geologist indicated that technical materials from mountain surveys were burned shortly before the geologist's death, following specific instructions about disposal of _77 _. Another family reported that geological notebooks and survey photographs were removed from an estate during what was described as '78, conducted by government geological services shortly after the geologist's retirement. The family was told the materials contained classified technical data requiring return to government custody. The materials were never returned, and subsequent requests for access were denied. They weren't losing data through technical failures, they were eliminating documentation systematically, ensuring that evidence of discovered chambers, of coordinated suppression operations, of the refugee infrastructure these geological surveys had encountered would not survive inaccessible archives. Between 2006 and 2012, hundreds of geologists, survey technicians, LIDAR specialists, and field workers participated in geological surveys across Central Asian mountain ranges. These professionals documented everything. The 21st century was the great age of geological data documentation, when technical professionals published extensively, when geological societies maintained comprehensive databases, when every significant survey generated reports and analyses that entered permanent technical literature. Except for this. Not one published paper analyzes the architectural void structures encountered during mountain surveys. Not one geological society presentation discusses the geometric precision of chambers that couldn't be natural formations. Not one technical journal article examines the implications of coordinated interior refugee systems spanning 3 mountain ranges. This prompts a straightforward yet vital question. How did the discovery of extensive architectural infrastructure inside major Central Asian mountains generate zero contemporary technical analysis? The silence extends to personal accounts. Engineers who spent years supervising these projects publish papers detailing their survey work, but never mentioning the chambers. Geologists who witnessed excavation teams encountering architectural voids produced no accounts describing what they saw. Survey coordinators who directed chamber documentation wrote no memoirs mentioning this work. Employment records from geological companies document the personnel assigned to mountain survey projects. Career files show where they worked, what projects they supervised, sometimes where they transferred afterward. But nowhere in these professional records is there documentation of geologists discussing unusual discoveries, requesting explanations for suppression protocols, or expressing concerns about classification of findings. The pattern extends to workers who change careers after these projects. Employment records show field technicians who worked on mountain surveys during the critical period subsequently taking positions in other countries. Some moved to resource extraction projects in the Middle East. Others took survey work in African mineral assessments. But in none of the professional networks where these workers participated, in none of the international conferences where they presented other work, is there mention of discovering architectural chambers inside Central Asian mountains. Career patterns show troubling trajectories. Senior surveyors with established careers in Kazakhstan suddenly accepting positions in remote Indonesian mining operations. Mid-career project managers from Kyrgyz geological firms transferring to Australian resource companies. Lead scientists from Tajik survey teams moving to South American projects. The pattern appears too consistently to represent natural career development. It suggests systematic geographic dispersion, removal of personnel with direct chamber knowledge from Central Asian professional networks. Pension records provide partial evidence. Geological companies granted unusually generous early retirement packages to certain senior personnel during the 2000s and 10s. The recipients were geologists and project managers who had supervised surveys during the chamber documentation period. The retirement arrangements were exceptional, offering compensation well above standard industry benefits. The pension structures suggest inducements for departure from active professional life rather than rewards for completed service. Employment contracts from geological firms that conducted mountain surveys contained clauses not standard in earlier industry agreements. Confidentiality provisions requiring personnel to obtain company approval before discussing project findings publicly. Non-disclosure terms extending beyond employment termination. A contract from a Kazakh geological firm dated 2007 includes provisions requiring employees to maintain confidentiality regarding sensitive geological findings, and to refrain from unauthorized discussion of project discoveries in professional or public forums. Chinese geologists who participated in border region surveys faced more direct restrictions. Personnel assigned to mountain projects in Xinjiang province between 2007 and 2011 worked under military-administered security protocols. Survey findings were classified upon completion under national security designation. Publication of any project-related information without government authorization constituted criminal violation of state secrecy laws. The silence is most disturbing among senior geologists who should have been professionally obligated to document their findings. Geological ethics require careful documentation of significant discoveries. Yet the geologists who supervised chamber documentation projects, who witnessed architectural precision that challenged geological formation theories, who directed measurement of refuge infrastructure spanning continental distances, produced no documentation for professional archives or academic review. Family archives occasionally preserve what professional collections don't. I've contacted descendants of several geologists who worked on these projects, seeking access to personal materials that might have escaped systematic destruction. In most cases, families have no technical papers from the survey period. In several instances, families report that materials were deliberately destroyed by the geologists themselves. An interview with descendants of a Kazakh survey coordinator revealed that technical notebooks existed throughout the geologist's career, except for a specific gap. Notebooks from projects before 2006 survive in family possession. Notebooks from work after 2012 remain in the collection, but notebooks from 2006 to 2012, precisely covering the chamber documentation period, are absent. Between 2010 and 2020, as geologists who had supervised chamber projects reached career conclusion or retirement, professional society obituaries and retirement notices appeared. But notices for geologists who had worked on mountain surveys during the chamber documentation period show a pattern of omission. Their careers are documented comprehensively, except for the years between 2006 and 2012. The most significant geological work of their professional lives is absent from their official career records. Construction workers and field technicians who participated in survey operations and sealing work faced different circumstances than professional geologists, but reached the same silence. The absence of testimony suggests workers understood that certain experiences were not to be discussed. An image that wasn't meant to stand out shows what appears to be field workers during a rest period. Men positioned around equipment storage, though the specific location is unidentified. These would be the technicians who operated LIDAR systems that revealed chambers, who conducted measurements inside voids, who witnessed sealing operations. Their silence is complete. The evidence points to something far more expansive than professional discretion. The coordination of silence across geologists, technicians, field workers, archaeological teams, across multiple nations and professional organizations suggests systematic suppression implemented through legal mechanisms, financial inducements, career pressures, and geographic dispersal, ensuring witnesses would never coordinate testimony or challenge official narratives about natural geological formations and routine survey operations. They weren't individually choosing silence. They were systematically prevented from speaking through career interruptions, geographic dispersion, financial inducements, and legal restrictions that would support prosecution had they attempted to provide testimony about what they documented inside Central Asian mountains.